stood at the edge of the cliff, the Pacific wind tearing at my hair, my hands trembling as I adjusted the camera lens. Below, the ocean roared, waves crashing against jagged rocks with a violence that mirrored the storm in my chest. The crew was shouting, their voices barely audible over the gale, urging me to step back, but I needed this shot, the perfect angle to capture the raw, untamed grief of my protagonist, a woman standing at the precipice of her own unraveling. One wrong move and I'd plummet 50 feet to the rocks below. My heart pounded, not just from the danger, but from the weight of everything I'd fought for, everything I'd hidden. This was Oregon, 3 years ago, and I was Emma Carter, a nobody to my family, but out here, on this cliff, I was a director chasing a vision no one else could see. I didn't fall that day, but I came close, closer than I'd ever admit to anyone, especially them. Now, at 34, I stood in another kind of danger zone. The polished dining room of my parents' Malibu mansion, the air thick with the scent of rosemary roasted lamb and my mother's signature lavender candles. The table gleamed under the chandelier, set with crystal wine glasses and heirloom silverware, each piece a testament to the Carter family's obsession with appearances. This was no ordinary dinner. It was a celebration of my brother James's engagement to Sophia, a high-powered lawyer with a smile that could charm a courtroom. My mother, Evelyn, had orchestrated every detail, from the imported linens to the curated guest list, ensuring the evening screamed success. But for me, it was a battlefield, and I was unarmed. "Emma, you're late again," Evelyn said, her voice slicing through the chatter as I stepped into the room. Her perfectly manicured hand gestured to the empty chair at the far end of the table, as far from her as possible. "Honestly, I don't know why you bother coming if you can't be on time." Her words landed like a slap, and the room fell silent. James's fiancée, Sophia, glanced up from her wine glass, her eyes flickering with curiosity. My father, William, adjusted his tie, avoiding my gaze. James, ever the golden child, gave me a sympathetic half-smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. The guests, Evelyn's society friends, and a few of James's colleagues, shifted uncomfortably, their polite smiles frozen. I felt the familiar sting of invisibility, the same one I'd carried since childhood, but tonight it burned deeper. I slid into my seat, the mahogany chair creaking under me, and forced a smile. "Traffic on the PCH," I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. Evelyn snorted, a sound so dismissive it could have been a laugh in another context. "Always an excuse," she said, turning to Sophia with a dazzling smile. "Now, Sophia, tell us about the wedding plans. I hear your family's country club in Santa Barbara is divine." The conversation shifted and I was erased, just like always. I should have been used to it by now. Growing up in Malibu, where the ocean glittered and the houses screamed wealth, I'd learned early that I was the spare, the afterthought to James's shining star. He was 4 years older, the son who could do no wrong. Captain of the lacrosse team, Stanford grad, now a rising star in investment banking, his room was a museum of trophies, framed degrees, and photos of him shaking hands with CEOs. My parents had front-row seats to every game, every ceremony, their cameras flashing like paparazzi. Me? I was the girl who spent her childhood in the shadows, scribbling scripts in notebooks, dreaming of stories that could make people feel something real. My earliest memory of trying to shine was at 10, when I directed a school play about a girl who could speak to the stars. The local paper called it a triumph of youthful imagination. But my parents didn't show up. James had a golf tournament, and Evelyn's voice still echoed in my head. "You understand, Emma. This is important for your brother." That night, as the dinner conversation swirled around wedding venues and James's latest promotion, I picked at my plate, the roasted lamb tasteless in my mouth. Sophia, radiant in a tailored silk dress, leaned across the table, her eyes warm. "Emma, James says you live in New York. What do you do there? Something in film, right? Her question was innocent, but it felt like a spotlight in a dark room. Before I could answer, Evelyn cut in, her laugh sharp as a blade. Oh, Emma's just dabbling in some little film projects. Nothing serious, of course. Not like James, who just closed a deal with Goldman Sachs. The table chuckled, and I felt my face burn. Dabbling, little projects. The words were a knife, twisting in a wound that never healed. Sophia's brow furrowed, and she tilted her head, studying me. Film sounds fascinating, she said, undeterred. What kind of projects? I opened my mouth, but Evelyn was faster. She's always been a dreamer, she said, waving a hand dismissively. You know, always playing with cameras as a kid, wasting time on those artsy things. Not a real career like yours, Sophia. The room laughed again, louder this time, and I felt the walls closing in. I could have told them the truth. About the films I'd directed, the awards I'd won, the Netflix deal that had made headlines. But I didn't. I'd learned long ago that sharing my dreams with this family was like handing them a match to burn them down. Then Sophia did something that changed everything. She reached for her phone, her fingers moving discreetly under the table. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming she was checking a text. But her eyes widened, and she glanced at me, then back at her screen. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through Evelyn's monologue about wedding cake tears. "I hope this isn't rude, but Emma, are you the Emma Carter, the director?" The room went still, forks pausing mid-air. Evelyn's smile froze, her eyes narrowing. William looked up from his plate, confused. James leaned forward, frowning. Sophia held up her phone, displaying my IMDb page, the one with my headshot and a list of accolades longer than this dinner table. Emma Carter, Sophia read aloud, her voice trembling with excitement. Director of Shadows of Silence, winner of the Directors Guild of America Award, nominated for an Oscar for Unspoken Tides, which was recently acquired by Netflix for a reported 8 figures. She looked at me, her eyes bright with awe. "That's you, isn't it?" The photo matches. The silence was deafening, a vacuum sucking the air from the room. Evelyn's wineglass trembled in her hand. William's mouth opened, then closed. James stared at me like I was a stranger. I felt my pulse hammering, my carefully constructed double life crumbling like a house of cards. "Let me see that," Evelyn snapped, snatching Sophia's phone. Her eyes scanned the screen, and I saw the moment her disbelief cracked. Her lips parted, her face paling. This has to be a mistake," she said, but her voice wavered. "Some other Emma Carter." "No mistake," Sophia said, taking her phone back. "It says here your work has been compared to Scorsese and Coppola. The Hollywood Reporter called Unspoken Tides a cinematic revelation. You've been a jury member at Cannes, Emma. Cannes." She turned to the table, her enthusiasm infectious. "I watched your film last year for a charity screening. It was breathtaking." James leaned toward Sophia's phone, his eyes widening as he scrolled. "Holy... Emma, is this real?" he asked, his voice a mix of shock and something like betrayal. William put down his fork, his hand shaking as he reached for his reading glasses. "Let me see that," he said, his voice quiet but urgent. Evelyn's face was a mask of confusion, her world tilting off its axis. "If you're so successful," she said, her tone sharp with skepticism, "why are you still driving that beat-up Honda? Why don't you live in a mansion like your brother?" I almost laughed. The absurdity of her measuring success by cars and houses so quintessentially Evelyn. "My apartment in Brooklyn's Park Slope isn't exactly a shack, Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "And I take the subway because parking in New York is a nightmare, not because I'm broke." Sophia, still scrolling, gasped. "There's a clip here of you accepting the DGA award," she said, turning her phone to show a video of me on a stage in a black gown, thanking my crew and my mentor, Olivia Grant. The surrealness of it hit me hard, my family watching me accept a prestigious award at the same table where I'd just been called a failure. "Why didn't you tell us?" James asked, his voice low, almost hurt. "All this time we thought you were just, I don't know, struggling in New York." Evelyn's eyes flashed. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You never mentioned being some big-shot director. We would have remembered something like that." I took a deep breath, the years of suppressed pain rising like a tide. "I did try," I said, my voice calm but firm. "When my first film premiered at Sundance, I called home, so excited I could barely speak. You said you were busy planning James's engagement party and you'd call back. You never did." William's face fell, his eyes searching mine. "I don't remember that," he said softly. "Of course you don't," I said, the words spilling out now. "When Shadows of Silence was released, I sent you both tickets to the New York premiere, begged you to come. You said you had a charity gala for James's firm. The tickets sat unopened in your guest room for months. I saw them when I visited for Christmas, gathering dust next to your golf trophies." Sophia's face softened, her eyes filled with sympathy. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands clutching her napkin like a lifeline. "You should have made it clear it was important," she said, her voice defensive. "We were busy, Emma. You can't expect us to drop everything for your little projects." The word little hit like a punch, and I felt the room spin. "Little?" I repeated, my voice rising. "My films have been watched by millions, Mom. They've won awards you've never even heard of. And every time I tried to share that with you, you changed the subject to James's bonuses or his new penthouse." The table was silent now, the guests staring at their plates, the air thick with tension. Sophia, perhaps sensing she'd ignited a fire, tried to pivot. "Your films are incredible, Emma," she said. "Unspoken Tides, the way you captured that family's unspoken pain, it felt so real, almost like—" She hesitated, her eyes flicking to Evelyn. "Like it was personal?" The implication hung in the air. Had I been pouring my family's dysfunction into my films? The answer was yes, but not in the way they might think. My characters weren't them, but the feelings, the ache of being unseen, the hunger for validation, those were mine, carved from years of sitting at tables like this one, fading into the background. William, still scrolling on Sophia's phone, looked up, his eyes damp. "It says here your work explores themes of neglect and conditional love," he said quietly. Is that how you see us, Emma?" The question cut deep, and I felt the weight of decades of hurt pressing down. "I see you as parents who only had room for one child's success," I said carefully, "and that child was never me, so I built a life that didn't need your approval. I built it in spite of you." Evelyn stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hard wood. "I need to clear the plates," she said, her voice tight, though no one had finished eating. She gathered dishes with shaking hands, retreating to the kitchen. William watched her go, then turned to me. "This is important, Evelyn," he said, his voice firm for the first time in years. "Sit down." She didn't. The conversation limped on, Sophia asking cautious questions about my process, James staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. But the damage was done. My secret was out, my two worlds colliding in a spectacular crash. I'd spent years hiding my success, not because I was ashamed, but because I couldn't bear to offer it to them only to have it dismissed again. And yet, here we were, the truth laid bare at a dinner table set for someone else's triumph. It wasn't always the invisible daughter. As a kid, I'd run through our Malibu backyard, the Pacific Ocean glittering in the distance, dreaming of stories that could make people cry, laugh, feel alive. I'd borrow my dad's old camcorder, filming makeshift movies with my friends, directing them with a seriousness that made them giggle. At 10, when I staged that school play, I poured my heart into every line, every prop, believing my parents would see me, really see me, but they didn't. James's golf tournament was the priority, and my play became just another thing I did alone. By 16, I was interning at a local movie theater, learning the mechanics of projection, sneaking into the editing room to tinker with old reels. That's when the fire happened. It started in the projection booth, a spark from faulty wiring that turned into a blaze. I was alone, trying to save a box of vintage film reels. Irreplaceable pieces of history. The smoke was so thick I could barely breathe, my lungs burning as I dragged the box toward the exit. The ceiling groaned above me, and I stumbled, falling to my knees as flames licked the walls. I thought I was going to die there, 16 years old, clutching celluloid dreams. A firefighter pulled me out just in time, but I never told my family. Evelyn would have called me reckless, a troublemaker chasing a childish hobby. So I buried it, like I buried so much else. High school was a battlefield of its own. Evelyn was relentless, insisting I abandon filmmaking for something practical like business or law. "You're not James," she'd say, as if I needed the reminder. "You can't just coast on talent you don't have." Her words pushed me into a quiet depression, nights spent staring at my ceiling, wondering if I was as worthless as she seemed to think. I'd lie awake, scripting scenes in my head, stories of girls who rose from ashes, who proved everyone wrong. Those stories kept me alive, gave me something to hold on to when my family's indifference threatened to swallow me whole. When I got accepted to NYU's film school, it felt like a lifeline. I packed 2 suitcases in my dreams, leaving Malibu behind for New York's chaos. Evelyn's parting words were a prophecy of failure. "You'll be back in 6 months, Emma, when you realize you can't hack it." I didn't argue. I just left, determined to prove her wrong, even if she'd never know it. New York was where I found myself. NYU's film department was a crucible, forging my raw passion into something sharp and real. My professors saw potential in me, praising my ability to weave emotion into every frame. I worked harder than I ever had, staying up until dawn in editing suites, my eyes burning from the glow of the screen. My first real break came when I was 22, when my short film Flicker won a student award. I called home, my heart racing, hoping for once they'd care. Evelyn answered, her voice distracted. "That's nice, Emma, but James just got into Stanford's MBA program. Can we talk later?" Later never came. I stopped trying after that. I built a life in New York that didn't need their validation. I worked as a production assistant at an indie film studio in Brooklyn, fetching coffee and running cables, learning the industry from the ground up. That's where I met Olivia Grant, a legend in indie film, an Oscar winner with a reputation for spotting talent. She saw something in me, maybe the hunger in my eyes, and took me under her wing. "You've got a voice, Emma," she told me after watching my rough cut of a short film. "Don't let anyone silence it." Her words were oxygen, fueling me through the rejections, the sleepless nights, the endless hustle. My first feature, Shadows of Silence, was a labor of love, shot on a shoestring budget over 3 years. It premiered at Sundance when I was 28, and the audience's standing ovation felt like a rebirth. Variety called it a haunting exploration of unspoken grief, and suddenly my name was everywhere. I didn't tell my family. I couldn't bear the thought of Evelyn's dismissive, "That's nice," or William's vague nod. Instead, I celebrated with my crew, my chosen family, in a dive bar in Park City, toasting to a dream I'd fought for alone. But the fight wasn't always glamorous. 3 years ago, I was in Oregon, directing a scene on that cliff, the wind howling, the rocks below waiting to claim me. I knew it was risky, but I needed that shot, the moment where my protagonist faced her demons against the vast, unforgiving ocean. My crew begged me to let a stunt coordinator handle it, but I was stubborn, climbing out onto the ledge myself. My foot slipped, and for a moment I was weightless, the world tilting as I grabbed a jagged outcrop. My hands bled, my heart thundered, but I got the shot. It was worth it, I told myself, even as my crew pulled me back, their faces pale with fear. I didn't tell my family about that either. They wouldn't have understood. Then there was Mexico 2 years ago, filming a documentary in a remote village. We were ambushed by a local gang, men with guns who thought we were rich American filmmakers ripe for extortion. They held my crew at gunpoint, demanding a ransom we didn't have. I negotiated, my voice steady despite the terror, promising to pay them once we were safe. I don't know how I kept calm. Maybe it was the years of swallowing my fear in front of Evelyn. We got out, but it cost me every cent I'd saved that year. I told no one, not even Olivia. My family would have seen it as proof I was in over my head, chasing a dangerous dream. The pressure wasn't just physical. Last year, a major studio offered me a deal to direct a blockbuster, but they wanted me to change everything that made my films mine, strip out the raw emotion, replace it with CGI and predictable beats. I spent weeks agonizing, knowing that saying no could tank my career, but saying yes would mean selling my soul. I turned them down, and the producer's parting words still haunted me. "You'll regret this, Emma. You're not as big as you think." I pushed through, but the doubt lingered, a shadow over every decision. And then there was the lawsuit. 6 months ago, an actor I'd fired for unprofessional behavior sued me, claiming discrimination. The tabloids pounced, twisting the story into a scandal that painted me as a tyrant. I spent nights drafting statements, meeting with lawyers, watching my reputation teeter on the edge. I won the case, but the stress left scars, a reminder that success came with enemy. I didn't tell my family. They'd have seen it as proof I couldn't handle my little hobby. Despite it all, I kept going. Unspoken Tides, my second feature, was a sleeper hit, winning at Toronto and landing on Netflix for a sum that made my head spin. I was invited to lecture at NYU, to judge at Cannes, to dine with producers who treated me like I mattered. But back in Malibu, I was still just Emma, the daughter who'd never measure up. The irony was bitter. I'd built a career that shook the industry, but I couldn't shake my family's indifference. That night at the dinner table, as Sophia's discovery unraveled my secret, I felt exposed, raw, like a nerve laid bare. Evelyn's accusation that I was faking it stung more than I expected. "You would have told us if you were really this successful," she said, her voice laced with suspicion. "Why would you hide something like this unless it's not true?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Because you never listened, Mom," I said. "Every time I tried, you made it clear James was the only one who mattered. His promotions, his deals, his life. I stopped trying because it hurt too much to be ignored." William's eyes were wet now, his glasses fogging up. "I didn't know, Emma," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know any of this." James reached across the table, his hand hovering like he wanted to touch mine, but didn't know how. "Why didn't you push harder?" he asked. "Why didn't you make us see?" I shook my head, the weight of years pressing down. "It wasn't my job to make you see me," I said. "I was your daughter, your sister. You should have wanted to know." Sophia, bless her, tried to bridge the gap. "Your films are so powerful, Emma," she said. "The way you show what it's like to feel invisible. It's like you're telling your own story." She wasn't wrong. Every frame I'd directed was a piece of me, a way to process the pain of being unseen. My films weren't about my family, not exactly, but they were born from the ache of their neglect, the longing for a love that didn't come with condition. As the dinner dissolved into awkward silences and half-hearted dessert, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. My secret was out, my carefully guarded world exposed. Evelyn stayed in the kitchen, avoiding me. William kept scrolling through my IMDb page, murmuring about reviews and awards. James and Sophia whispered to each other, their glances heavy with questions. I wanted to leave, to run back to New York where I was someone, but I stayed, rooted by the same stubborn hope that had kept me coming back all these years. Driving back to my hotel that night, the Pacific Coast Highway stretching dark and endless before me, I felt lighter, like a weight I'd carried for decades was starting to lift. My family had seen me, finally, but it wasn't their recognition I'd been chasing all along. It was my own. I'd built a life that mattered, a career that spoke for itself, and no amount of their dismissal could take that away. But as the ocean roared beside me, I couldn't shake the question, what would happen now? Would they try to know me? Or would they rewrite this moment to fit their narrative, relegating me back to the shadows? Only time would tell, but for the first time, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The ocean's roar faded as I pulled into the hotel parking lot, the neon glow of the sign casting jagged shadows across my dashboard. My hands still gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as if I could anchor myself against the storm that had erupted at my parents' Malibu mansion. Sophia's Google search had ripped the veil off my double life, exposing me as Emma Carter, the director whose films had moved millions, not the failure my mother, Evelyn, had branded me just hours ago. The weight of that dinner clung to me like damp fog, every word, every glance replaying in my mind. Evelyn's accusation that I was faking my success, William's stunned silence, James's hurt confusion, they were all knives cutting deeper than I'd expected. But beneath the pain was something new, a spark of freedom, a crack in the wall I'd built to protect myself. As I stepped out into the cool California night, my phone buzzed, a text from Sophia. "I'm so sorry if I upset you, Emma. I had no idea. They didn't know. Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the screen, unsure whether to feel grateful or betrayed. She'd meant well, but she'd unleashed a reckoning I wasn't ready for. I typed a quick reply, "It's okay, tomorrow works," and headed to my room, the weight of the night pressing heavier with each step. Sleep didn't come easy. I lay on the stiff hotel bed, the hum of the air conditioner a poor substitute for New York City pulse. My mind churned, pulling me back to moments I'd buried, moments that had shaped the director I'd become. There was the fire at 16, the smoke choking my lungs as I dragged those film reels to safety, the heat searing my skin. I'd been reckless, driven by a need to prove I could save something valuable, something my family would never understand. Then Mexico, the cold steel of a gun pressed against my cinematographer's temple, my voice steady as I bargained with men who saw us as dollar signs. And Alaska, just last year, where I'd nearly frozen to death in a blizzard, clutching my camera like a lifeline, my fingers numb but my resolve unshaken. Each time, I'd walked away scarred but stronger, my films sharper for it. But I'd never told my family. To them, I was still the girl who dabbled in movies, not the woman who'd risked everything to tell stories that mattered. By morning, the weight hadn't lifted, but I forced myself out of bed, splashing cold water on my face and pulling on a black blazer over jeans, a New York habit, armor for whatever came next. Sophia had suggested coffee at a beachfront cafe in Santa Monica, a neutral ground away from the Carter family's gilded cage. As I drove along the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean glittering under a cloudless sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that last night was just the beginning. What would Evelyn do now that her narrative, Emma, the disappointing daughter, had been shattered? Would William's quiet apology hold? or would he retreat into his usual passivity? And James, my golden brother, who'd looked at me like I was a stranger, would he try to bridge the gap? Or would he resent me for stealing his spotlight? The cafe was buzzing, tourists snapping selfies with the pier in the background, locals sipping oat milk lattes. Sophia was already there, seated at a corner table, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. She stood when she saw me, her smile warm but cautious. "Emma," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "I'm so glad you came. I feel awful about last night." I slid into the seat across from her, the scent of espresso grounding me. "It's not your fault," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You didn't know?" She leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. "I just couldn't believe it when your mom said those things. A failure? Emma, you're a legend. I mean, Unspoken Tides. I cried for days after watching it. How could they not know?" Her sincerity disarmed me, but it also stirred something bitter. "They didn't want to know," I said, stirring my coffee absently. "It's been like that my whole life. James was the star and I was the shadow. I stopped trying to change their minds years ago." Sophia's brow furrowed and she reached for her phone, hesitating. "I looked you up again this morning," she admitted. "There's so much more. Interviews, articles, a New Yorker profile. You're not just successful, Emma. You're a force. Why didn't you ever push back, make them see?" I sighed, the question cutting too close, because every time I tried it hurt more. When I was a kid, I'd show them my scripts, my little home movies. Evelyn would laugh, say I was wasting my time. William would nod and promise to watch later, but later never came. After a while, I decided I didn't need their approval. I built my life without it. Sophia's eyes softened, but there was a spark of determination in them. "They need to see you now," she said. "Not just your films, but you, the real you. I want to help, if you'll let me." Her offer caught me off guard, a flicker of hope in a heart that had learned to guard itself. But before I could respond, my phone vibrated, a call from an unknown number. I ignored it, but it buzzed again, insistent. "Sorry," I said, glancing at the screen. The area code was Los Angeles. I answered, expecting a telemarketer, but the voice on the other end was sharp, familiar, and chilling. "Emma Carter, this is Victor Klein." My stomach dropped. Victor Klein was the film critic who'd nearly destroyed me 2 years ago, the one who'd published a scathing, fabricated review of Shadows of Silence, accusing me of plagiarizing a lesser-known director. It had taken months to clear my name, and the legal battle had drained me emotionally and financially. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. "I hear you're back in LA, he said, his tone dripping with venom. "Thought you should know there's a story circulating. Someone tipped off Variety about your little family drama last night. They're calling it The Director's Secret Shame. Care to comment?" My heart stopped. The dinner, Sophia's Google search, my confrontation with Evelyn, it was all about to become tabloid fodder. "Who tipped them?" I demanded, though I already suspected. Victor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Does it matter? You've always been good at hiding, Emma. But you can't hide this." "Good luck." He hung up, leaving me staring at my phone, the cafe's chatter fading to a dull roar. Sophia's eyes widened. "What's wrong?" she asked. I forced a smile, my mind racing. "Just an old ghost," I said, but the truth was heavier. Someone had leaked the dinner to the press, and I had a sinking feeling it was Evelyn, desperate to control the narrative, to paint me as the ungrateful daughter who'd betrayed her family. Or worse, it was someone else at that table, one of her society friends eager for gossip. The thought made my skin crawl. My career, my pain, my life, they were about to be dissected for clicks and headlines. I pushed the fear down and focused on Sophia. "You said you want to help," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my head. What did you have in mind?" She leaned in, her lawyer's precision taking over. "I was thinking we could host a screening of Unspoken Tides at the engagement party next month. Invite your parents' friends, James' colleagues, the whole Malibu crowd. Let them see your work. Let them see you. It's time they understood who you are." The idea was bold, almost reckless, and it terrified me. A screening in my parents' backyard? Under Evelyn's nose? It was a declaration of war, but it also felt like a chance to reclaim my story. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let's do it." The next few weeks were a blur of preparation and dread. Back in New York, I threw myself into work, editing the final cut of my new film, Parallel Shores, a story about sisters separated by secrets, their lives mirroring each other in ways they never imagined. The parallels to my own life weren't lost on me, and every edit felt like peeling back another layer of my own story. But Victor's call lingered, a shadow over everything. The Variety story dropped a week later, a vicious piece that twisted last night's dinner into a soap opera. Oscar-nominated director's family feud exposed. It quoted anonymous sources, likely Evelyn's bridge club friends, claiming I'd hidden my success out of spite and shamed my family with autobiographical films. The comments section was a cesspool, accusing me of everything from arrogance to betrayal. I wanted to scream, to call Evelyn and demand answers, but I didn't. Instead, I channeled the anger into my work, pouring it into every frame of Parallel Shores. But the pressure was relentless. The studio that had tried to strong-arm me last year was back, offering a deal to distribute Parallel Shores, but only if I let them recut it for a PG-13 audience. My film was raw, unflinching, a story of grief and redemption that didn't shy away from the messy edges of human emotion. Their version would be a sanitized shadow, a betrayal of everything I'd fought for. My agent Rachel urged me to consider it. "This could take you to the next level, Emma," she said over Zoom, her voice calm but insistent. "You're already fighting a PR nightmare. A big studio deal could shift the narrative." I hung up, my hands shaking. Saying no could tank my career. Saying yes would mean losing myself. I spent nights pacing my Brooklyn apartment, the city's skyline glittering outside, a reminder of how far I'd come and how much I could still lose. Then came the lawsuit's aftermath. The actor I'd fired, a volatile diva named Marcus Reed, wasn't done with me. After losing the discrimination case, he'd taken to social media, posting cryptic rants about injustice and Hollywood's darlings. His followers, tens of thousands of them, piled on, flooding my Instagram with hate. "You're a fraud, Emma Carter," one read. "You'll crash and burn." I tried to ignore it, but each message was a needle, pricking the confidence I'd spent years building. I wondered if Evelyn was reading them, nodding along, seeing proof of her prophecy that I'd fail. The Alaska incident haunted me too. I'd been shooting a documentary in the wilderness, capturing the stark beauty of the tundra for a scene about isolation. A blizzard hit without warning, trapping me and my small crew in a flimsy tent. The temperature plummeted to -20, the wind screaming like a banshee. My camera was my lifeline, holding the footage we'd risked everything for. I wrapped it in my parka, my fingers so numb I could barely feel them, my breath freezing in the air. We were stranded for 18 hours, and I thought of my family, not because I wanted their comfort, but because I wondered if they'd even care if I didn't come back. A rescue team found us just before hypothermia set in, but the memory lingered, a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything for my art. As the engagement party loomed, I flew back to Malibu, my stomach knotted with anticipation. Sophia had been relentless, coordinating with my team to set up a screening in my parents' backyard. She'd even convinced James to invite half of Malibu's elite producers, philanthropists, the kind of people Evelyn courted for her social standing. It was a gamble, one that could either force my family to see me or blow up in my face. The night before the party, I got a call from James. "Mom's freaking out," he said, his voice tense. "She thinks you're trying to upstage the engagement. She's talking about canceling the screening." I gripped the phone, my heart sinking. "What do you think?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "I think you deserve this, Emma. I'm sorry I never saw it before. I'm on your side." His words were a lifeline, but they didn't erase the dread. Evelyn canceling the screening would be her way of reasserting control, of keeping me in the shadows. The morning of the party, I arrived at the Carter mansion early, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and sea salt. The backyard was transformed. String lights draped over the pergola, a massive screen set up near the pool, rows of chairs for 100 guests. Sophia greeted me with a hug, her eyes bright with excitement. "This is going to be amazing," she said. "I've got a surprise for you too." I raised an eyebrow, wary. "What kind of surprise?" She grinned, mischievous. "You'll see. Just trust me." Inside, Evelyn was directing caterers with her usual precision, her face a mask of composure. But when she saw me, her eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dark passing through them. "Emma," she said, her voice clipped, "I hope you're not planning to make this night about you." The words stung, but I held her gaze. "It's about James and Sophia," I said evenly. "The screening was their idea." She pursed her lips, unconvinced, and turned back to the caterer. William appeared from his study, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Emma," he said, pulling me into a hug, a rare gesture that caught me off guard. "I watched Shadows of Silence last night. It's extraordinary." I'm so proud. His words were a balm, but they couldn't erase the tension radiating from Evelyn. As guests arrived, the backyard filled with the hum of conversation, glasses clinking, laughter echoing off the ocean. I spotted familiar faces, producers I'd met at festivals, a few actors from my films, even a journalist from The Hollywood Reporter. Sophia had pulled strings I hadn't expected, turning this into more than a family event. It was a stage, and I was both the star and the target. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, my agent. "Be careful tonight. Victor Klein's here." My blood ran cold. Victor, the critic who'd tried to ruin me, was in my parents' backyard, likely sniffing for more dirt. I scanned the crowd, spotting him near the bar, his sharp eyes locking onto mine. He raised his glass, a mocking toast, and I felt a chill. This wasn't just a screening. It was a battleground. Sophia's father, a distinguished attorney, took the stage to introduce me, his voice booming with pride. "Emma Carter," he said, "is not just James's sister, but a visionary director whose work has redefined indie cinema. Tonight, we're honored to screen a clip from her award-winning film, Unspoken Tides." The applause was warm, but I felt Evelyn's eyes boring into me from across the lawn. I stepped to the podium, my heart pounding, the weight of every risk I'd taken, every fire, every blizzard, every lawsuit pressing down. "Thank you," I said, my voice steadied despite the nerves. "This film is about finding your voice, even when the world tries to silence you. I hope it resonates." The lights dimmed, and the screen came alive with Unspoken Tides. I'd chosen a scene where the protagonist, a young woman, confronts her family after years of being overlooked, her words raw and unfiltered. The parallels to my own life were undeniable, and I saw Evelyn shift uncomfortably in her seat. The clip ended with the protagonist walking away, her head high, and the crowd erupted in applause. Sophia was on her feet, tears in her eyes, and James joined her, clapping harder than anyone. William's face was unreadable, but his eyes were wet. Evelyn sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Then came Sophia's surprise. She took the stage, holding a microphone, her voice clear and commanding. "Before we continue," she said, "I want to share something special. Emma, you've inspired so many, including me. That's why I reached out to the Directors Guild, and they've sent a representative tonight to present you with a special recognition for your contributions to cinema." The crowd gasped as a woman in a sleek black dress stepped forward, holding a plaque. It was Olivia Grant, my mentor, the Oscar winner who'd believed in me when no one else did. I felt my knees buckle as she approached, her smile warm and proud. "Emma Carter," Olivia said, her voice carrying over the crowd, "your work has touched hearts and challenged conventions. On behalf of the Directors Guild, I'm honored to present you with this award for artistic courage." The crowd roared, and I took the plaque, my hands trembling. Olivia pulled me into a hug, whispering, "You've earned this, kid. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I looked out at the sea of faces, Sophia beaming, James nodding with pride, William wiping his eye, and Evelyn, her face a mix of shock and something softer, something I couldn't name. But the moment was shattered. Victor Klein stepped forward, his voice cutting through the applause like a blade. "A touching moment," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But let's not forget the real story here. Emma Carter, the director who's been hiding her success from her own family, spinning tales of neglect to fuel her art. Care to comment on the variety piece, Emma?" The crowd murmured, heads turning. I felt the ground shift beneath me, Victor's words a calculated strike to drag me back into the shadows. Before I could respond, Sophia stepped to the microphone, her lawyer's steel in her voice. "Mr. Klein," she said, "if you're here to spread lies, you're at the wrong party. Emma's work speaks for itself, and so does her integrity. Maybe you should focus on your own credibility." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Victor's face reddened. He slunk back into the shadows, but the damage was done. Whispers rippled through the guests, and I saw Evelyn's eyes dart to her friends, her face tight with embarrassment. I wanted to run, to escape the scrutiny, but Olivia's hand on my arm steadied me. "You've faced worse," she whispered. "Show them who you are." I nodded, taking the microphone. "Thank you, Olivia, Sophia, and everyone here," I said, my voice strong now. "I've spent years telling stories about people who feel unseen, because I know what that feels like. But tonight, I'm not invisible. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." The applause was deafening, a wave of support that drowned out Victor's venom. James crossed the lawn, pulling me into a hug, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Emma," he said. "I should have seen you sooner." William joined us, his hand on my shoulder. "I've been reading about your films," he said. "I ordered every one. I want to understand, Emma. I want to know you." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. Evelyn approached, hesitant, her face a battleground of pride and shame. "Your film was powerful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know you could do that." I met her gaze, unflinching. "You never asked," I said, not cruelly, but honestly. She nodded, a flicker of something like regret in her eyes. "I'm asking now," she said, and for the first time I believed she might mean it. As the party wound down, guests approached me, their words a blur of praise and awe. Sophia's cousin, a film professor, told me she taught Shadows of Silence in her classes. A producer slipped me his card, whispering about a potential deal. But it was William's quiet presence beside me that anchored me, his arm around my shoulders as we watched the stars emerge over the ocean. "I failed you, Emma," he said softly, "but I'm here now. I want to make this right." I leaned into him, the father I'd longed for all those years, and whispered, "It's a start." Driving back to my hotel, the Pacific glittering under the moonlight, I felt a shift, like a tide turning. The dinner, the screening, Victor's attack. It had all been a crucible, burning away the last of my fear. I'd spent years hiding, protecting my heart from a family that didn't see me. But tonight, I'd stepped into the light and they'd seen me, really seen me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Dad's already watching Unspoken Tides. Mom's joining him. They're proud, Emma. So am I. I smiled, the weight of decades lifting, if only a little. The invisible director was invisible no more, and whatever came next, scandals, studios, or family fights, I was ready to face it, my voice louder than ever.